Good morning and welcome to the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting for September 18th, 2018. Madam Clerk.
Item 1 on the closed session agenda, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one case pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2.
Are there any public comments on this item? Seeing none, we will go to closed session. Good morning and welcome to Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting for September 18th, 2018. Can you all please rise if you can for the pledge? Supervisor Mills, can you please lead us?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, closed session.
Report of today's closed session. Item 1, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one case pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2. There was no reportable action taken.
Moving on to announcements.
Announcements. This is a time for board members and county staff to provide updates of upcoming county events that may be of interest to the public.
Are there any board announcements? Supervisor Oliveira.
I have an announcement. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to announce that this weekend, actually this week, marks the 10th anniversary for a gentleman by the name of Rick Ryan. Rick Ryan is mostly known as the walking man of Murphy's. Being a former Marine, he walks and raises funding for veterans issues and things of that sort. He was going to try to be here, but unfortunately he's probably walking from Murphy's. But I'd just like to recognize that his dedication to his fellow Marines and fellow service peoples that he does by walking every day, and I'd like to commend him for that.
I'd like to make a correction to that, if I may. He's not a former Marine. He's always a Marine.
Thank you, Mr. Fry.
Supervisor Mills.
Yes, trust that you'll be presenting the job fair in Copperopolis as part of staff comments. Okay, thank you.
Any other board comments? Seeing none, staff comments?
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Director. And I would like to announce that in Copperopolis, tomorrow, Wednesday, from 10 to 2, there will be a resume review job fair at the Lake Tolic Bible Church. And the different companies that will be there, besides County of Calaveras, will be Caltrans, Saddle Creek Resort, Skyline Bear Valley, of course, Calaveras County Human Resources, and then Dignity Health Mark Twain Medical Center. And we want to make sure that everybody knows that this is occurring, and we welcome everybody to bring their resumes there. And our Human Resources, we have 2 representatives that will be there, both CJ and Deb Showman, and to review the resumes. And I will leave these flyers out there to be picked up.
And this is on Spangler Lane near IGA.
And yes, 3566 Spangler Lane in Copperopolis. And the second announcement that I have, I would like to invite all of you to our employee health fair that we will be having on October 11th from 10 to 2 right outside here in our beautiful new area, our Arbor area. And we are going to have Anthem Blue Cross out here to let everybody know about their benefits. And then also Delta Dental, your VSP provider, MHN to talk about our employee assistant program, which is a very, we have great participation. They have financial advice, help find dog sitter, besides other type of wellness assistance. And then also VALIC, which is our new deferred compensation, AFLAC, Legal Shield, and then also Mark Twain will be joining us and doing a blood pressure check, and we're going to have the blood mobile out here, so we can also donate to the community. And then also we're going to have lunch provided and some other surprises available to the employees. And we will be sending all of this information out to our employees and putting flyers up all over the government center. And that's it.
Thank you, Judy. Any other staff announcements? Seeing none, we'll move on to recognition and acknowledgements.
Item 2 is from Health and Human Services to adopt a proclamation honoring Mark McCormick for 37 years of service to the residents of Calaveras County in the Health and Human Services Agency Behavioral Health Division and congratulating him on his retirement.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. This is a proclamation recognizing Mark McCormick's 37 years of service as a part of the Health and Human Services Agency Behavioral Health Division and congratulating him on his retirement. Whereas Mr. McCormick began his career at Health and Human Services Agency Behavioral Health Division on August 26, 1981. Wow. Whereas Mr. McCormick, supervising clinician of Children's System of Care after 37 years of outstanding and meritorious service to the residents and community of the County of Calaveras, will be officially retiring on October 12, 2018. And whereas Mr. McCormick has helped lead a culture change from an illness-focused approach to a mind health approach, positively affecting the delivery of mental health services in the county and treating patients as people. And whereas Mr. McCormick has provided exceptional work and commendable dedication to children and families in the County of Calaveras, and whereas Mr. McCormick's top priority has been delivering quality care while demonstrating a high degree of integrity and compassion, whereas Mr. McCormick has consistently been supportive of staff, taking the time to coach them, provided words of encouragement, and viewed challenges as opportunities. Whereas Mr. McCormick's leadership, guidance, and institutional knowledge will be missed by our Health and Human Service Agency staff. And whereas Mr. McCormick's service to the County of Calaveras has been exemplary, worthy of special recognition, and will be remembered as a valued employee dedicated to both his position and our community.
So, any other board comments? Supervisor Oliveira? No? No? Sign. Supervisor Garamendi?
I just want to congratulate Mark on a really accomplishment, 37 years with an organization, supporting your community. It was really admirable, and thank you. And we look forward to you having more time available in Paloma. So congratulations, neighbor.
Any public comments? Come on, some of the crews from HR has got to come up and say some words.
Good morning, Board. My name is George Fry, and I've known Mark all of those 37 years. He's just an inspiration to anybody who wants to serve in the behavioral health department. He's a great person, and I have asked him on several occasions in the past few years. I said, Mark, when are you going to retire? So it's finally here. Thank you.
Good morning, Board. Bonnie Newman from Double Springs. I think I've known Mark since 1980. But so longer than that. And I'd just like to say I appreciate old timers hanging in there. Sometimes it's good to know when to bow out. And you're getting out alive, mister. Congratulations.
Hello, I'm David Sackman from Behavioral Health. I've worked with Mark since 1999. He was one of the first people that I met there, and was a great inspiration when I first started in the children's system of care. He already had quite a bit of experience, and we used to take a lot of walks at lunchtime and talk about behavioral health things and life things in general. And so I've missed those walks, and I'm going to miss Mark when he leaves.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Kristen Brinks, Health and Human Services. I've had the pleasure of working side by side with Mark over the past almost 2 years. He's truly an advocate for the youth of our community and always keeps the needs of our children at his forefront. It's been an honor to work with him, and he will be greatly missed.
Any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board.
Mr. Chair, I'll move to the proclamation.
We have a motion by Supervisor Alamera.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Garamendi. Any other comments? Not? I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0, Mark.
So now therefore be it proclaimed that the Board of Supervisors, County of Calaveras, this 18th of September of 2018, do hereby honor and recognize Mark McCormick for his many years of service and express their appreciation. I think our appreciation is more appropriate. To Mr. McCormick for his loyalty and leadership to the County of Calaveras, and wish him happiness, success, and good health as he begins a new chapter in his life. Passed and adopted by the Board of Supervisors, the County of Calaveras, State of California, this 18th day of September 2018. Would you like to come forward, sir?
There you go, together. There you go, better, thank you. A little bit more, Dennis, that way.
Wait a minute.
Thank you. Okay, one more. One more, Mark. Good.
Thanks to all. Mark,
Can we talk in the microphone?
thanks to all for this. This is really overwhelming. It's just really appreciate it. I made a commitment to University of Washington in 1981 to work 2 years in a rural area as part of a commitment to this program that I was involved in. And I made that commitment. It's been really wonderful to work here. I think the main thing is that I've been able to work with wonderful people for 37 years who are really committed to clients, to people in both adults, kids, and families who they want those people to have as good a life as possible. And they work hard, whatever they're doing, to try to make that happen. And it's just great to be a part of that. And it's been nice to live in Calaveras County in a rural area with supportive people. And I'm from Sonora, so it's pretty close to my family when they were alive, so it's great. I just, it's amazing 37 years are gone that quickly. So thank you so much.
Congratulations, Mark. Moving on, Madam Clerk. We'll let him clear out.
Okay. No,
All right.
that was the nice time. Public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the next order of business. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued as the last item of business in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard.
I want to remind everybody, if you want to speak for public comments, that we get in line here, no more than 5 in line, but that way I don't close it like we did last week and then somebody show up afterwards, so we want to keep moving. So, public comments.
We will not be silenced. It's been 830 days and still no nexus study. When do you plan on admitting that into evidence? After the comment period? Just like we know you do, Dennis. Why haven't we seen it yet? 830 days. Have a good day.
Good morning, Terry McBride from Mountain Ranch, District 2. Before I go into my comments, I want to make it. I noticed that Clyde Clapp didn't have the decency to so much as even read those man's papers. Dennis, you were quite busy looking down. I want to thank you, Gary, Jack, and Mike, for honoring the man's words, whether they're on paper or not. That is what America is all about. I am here in regards to a letter that all of us in District 2 received from our Central Cal Affairs Fire and Rescue, Jeff Stone. And he wrote a very concerning letter about the dire straits that our volunteer fire department is in at this time. And I don't doubt it at all. They're amazing men and women, and the majority of them are fire volunteers, and some, very few, are paid personnel. And that is on the potential of going away. And I have to wonder, I was here several weeks ago or so when our county assessor, the one that wants this huge, ridiculous raise, is 6,000 behind. And I have to wonder, times 65, which is what we pay now, however many of that is District 2, is being denied to our Central Fire District. And how many special fees and taxes that are supposed to go to special districts are being denied to them, that they now have to literally beg. You should read the letter from Jeff. It was well done, but he's at his wit's end. There's no getting around it. How are they going to be able to help the folks of their area? And this is because they're not getting the money. And they're asking for an increase of well over double because a department head is not doing her job. And once again, let's put it on the back of the deplorables, the commoners, just the regular hard-working folk. Let's put it on the back of them and let them cover what's not being done at their job. And so I would ask this board to do something about that. You must have some power as far as saying, hey, you want a raise? Earn it. Because that's how it works in the real world. There is no raise earned on this. And that our little fire district has to come to its people, writing the letter that he did. And Jeff's a good man. He wrote from his heart. That is a sad day. So that's basically what my talk about is this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Cynthia Sanchez, D2 taxpayer. On August 21st, 2018, a special meeting of the Board of Supervisors was held in these chambers. There were two agenda items. One was the new rules and procedure for the public at board meetings. Let me paraphrase. Basically diminishing and eliminating our freedom of speech, our First Amendment right. Dennis Mills stated that these meetings are not for the public, they are for the board members. We, the people, elected the Board of Supervisors to represent our districts. The board represents the public and works for the people. I am standing here speaking during the public comments portion of the meeting. The other agenda item on August 21st was the assessor requesting money from the state. The assessor was asked by Michael Oliveira, how far behind are you in your department? The assessor answered, 6,000 transfers. 6,000 transfers behind. How many of those are on the secured roll or unsecured roll? And she wants a pay raise? That is a lot of revenue not being collected annually, which has a negative effect on the county. For example, in District 2, the voters received a letter from Central Cal Affairs Fire. They are putting a ballot measure to the voters, labeled Measure D, to increase the current parcel fire fee from $65 annually to $150 annually. That is over a 130% increase. The people of D2 support the fire district, but cannot afford this astronomical increase. This all circles back to the assessor's department. The backlog of 6,000 transfers. How many of those transfers are in D2? Revenue not being collected year after year has a negative effect on entities that receive that revenue. For example, schools and fire departments. Ever since the fire, D2 has been hit with fees, taxes, and rules. Debris removal. Tree removal, more money out of our pocket. Number 3, county hired Tetra Tech to badger the property owners who had insurance to collect 100% of their debris removal proceeds from their insurance policies. Number 4, last December, D2 had substantial increases in their property taxes. Number 5, 8.06, taxing the people into oblivion. Number 6, shipping containers, the attempt to make them a structure to tax us again. Number 7, Measure D, 130% increase. This is why people speak at these meetings, to get the truth out. I am here at this podium merely as a spokesperson, representing and speaking for the many property owners and taxpayers of D2. I am here stating the facts. that certain departments are not doing their job. We hear it all the time. People are afraid to come to these meetings or speak out because they are afraid that the county will retaliate against them. Let it go on record that this county has a reputation of harassing people who come to this podium. We've already been singled out, harassed, and threatened. Thank you.
Good morning. There's none so blind as those who do not see, but if you don't look, you don't have a chance. There's none so deaf as those who will not listen, but if you don't hear, don't have a chance. This is an upside to the opioid epidemic. Most Americans are aware of the opioid crisis plaguing our society. We're referring to the overprescribing and misuse of certain medications used to control pain, such as OxyContin, Percocet, Vicodin, and fentanyl. This is not just a young person's problem. The risk of overdosing on these medications by older adults is heightened by other medication interactions and the use of alcohol. In 2016, there were 42,000 fatal overdoses on prescriptions and illegal opioids. Overdose deaths usually occur when oxygen cannot reach the brain or when the heart stops, leaving most organs unaffected. The drugs and blood can be flushed from the organs when they're harvested, resulting in an increase of viable organ donations nationwide. Seniors, newborns, people with bad eyesight, cancer survivors, even those with diabetes and hepatitis can be organ donors. One person has the potential to save 8 lives through heart, kidney, liver, pancreas, lung, and small intestine donations. A donor can also help me heal more than 50 others by donating skin tissue for burn victims, veins for people with chronic pain, tendons for athletes, or corneas for the visually impaired. Today, about 115,000 patients are waiting for a life-saving transplant. To be eligible for a donation, a person has to be in the hospital, on a ventilator, declared brain dead. This happens in only 1% of all deaths in the United States. There is pain in losing a loved one, but there's comfort in knowing an organ donation can help others. I hope you have on your driver's license a little thing that says organ donation. Thank you. I'd just like to bring you update. I don't know what Caltrans has to do with Double Springs Road, but they put a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit on Double Springs Road, and now people are driving 70 miles an hour. So it's gotten worse since I complained. I'd like to see a 35-mile hour.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. I'm Mike Darby from Angels Camp. I believe it's District 4. I just had a question. I was sitting up in the front row when the guy came up with the tape on his mouth and the signs. I couldn't see the signs. I couldn't see what he's saying. This is a public comment podium, and it looked like it was more directed directly to you guys, and especially Dennis. I'd like to see what those signs said. I don't know. Are they going to be seen on the TV? Okay. That's all. Thanks.
Good morning, Beth Whitkey, District 5. Last week during the budget hearing, my supervisor, Supervisor Clapp, mentioned that he isn't making much money on his salary because in the real world, it wouldn't fly because he's paying an assistant to do his emails and, basically do his job, I guess, because I thought that the emails that the supervisors have are often confidential and have to do with privileged information. So I'm concerned about who's got access to supervisor emails. I've also been aware that Vicki Mills has gone around saying that she's Supervisor Mills' staff. She sits in the back row and kind of bosses people around on where they can sit when she's here. And I want to remind everybody in the county, especially the supervisors, that the county does have nepotism rules in the county code. And so 264.645, employment of family members. A, no more than one member of an immediate family member may be employed in any one department in the county except as an emergency appointment or as otherwise approved by the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors may authorize exceptions to this section when the department head demonstrates the following. 1, that reasonable efforts have been made to recruit qualified applicants who is not a member of the immediate family. 2, that the person to be employed has been determined to be the most qualified person available for the position. 3, that the person shall not be under the supervision of a member of his or her immediate family. 4, that the person shall not perform functions or services within the department which directly relate to the functions of services performed by a member of his or her immediate family. B, under no circumstances shall a department head be authorized to hire a member of his or her own immediate family. No provision of this section, however, shall affect any employment status attained prior to the effective date of the ordinance codified in this section. It's my understanding that Kevin is checking your emails and driving you around and that you're paying him half your salary. And I don't think that's legal. And I think that you owe the people in your district an explanation. I think that a couple of Board of Supervisors meetings a month, and in your case, 3 committees, is not that much time spent for a $50,000 a year salary. So I would like for you to maybe talk to your constituents about why it is you need so much help. Thank you.
I would like to address in our county, in our state, and in the United States that we need to be strong and together, and by allowing drugs to have such a big part of our lives and culture, it is deteriorating us. And a lot of people think that we will go on forever like we have been, but we will not go on forever like we have been because we are deteriorating. We're imploding on ourselves, and the reason is because of drugs and the inhibitions that drugs bring. And I feel really sorry and heartbroken because I love my country and I love my state and I love where I live. And to see this deterioration happen is very sad. And so I'll let it go at that. Thanks.
Good morning. So last Tuesday, on the anniversary of September 11th, the board proclaimed this to be Constitution Week. I found it somewhat entertaining that your proclamation asks the public to reaffirm the ideals of the framers of the Constitution and makes no mention of you doing the same. I'm a fan of a lot of things constitutional, and high on the list is the First Amendment protecting the right to unabridged freedom of speech. As things stand, the chair is afforded a wide latitude in discretion to further enable or limit public input during meetings. For example, it wasn't very long ago public comment time was 5 minutes, occasionally restricted to 3 when the turnout was particularly large. That was understandable. Over time, the 3-minute limit just kind of stuck. The chair hasn't exercised any discretion to restore public comment time in a long time, even when there's almost no one in attendance. Not cool. Members of the public used to be able to cede our speaking time to another member of the public to make a point that either couldn't fit into the 3-minute limit or to someone more knowledgeable or more comfortable with public speaking. I've never seen the chair's discretion used that way during the tenure of this board. This afternoon, there's going to be a complex matter before us that no single speaker could reasonably address in 3 minutes. It'd be nice if I could have applied my 3 minutes from this morning to that agenda item. I wouldn't be taking up this time now, and I could have done a lot better job of addressing an issue of the utmost importance to the public. Nor can I use this time to expand my relevant comments on this afternoon's agenda item because Rule 45 prohibits me from doing so. Things like these might give the impression this board values limiting and shaping public input over promoting and expanding it. From the point of view of the public, this is a concerning trend. So I invite you all to consider honoring your own proclamation of Constitution Week by reaffirming the ideals and values it espouses, rather than asking others like us to do that. We elected you guys to do these things for us. Please honor that, your own proclamation. Thank you.
When I saw on Facebook Clyde Clapp and Tom McClintock in a picture, I contacted McClintock's office. McClintock's office said, no, we never supported the two of them in that picture. So obviously the picture was taken at another time. And I'm disappointed once again by Clyde Clapp's inappropriate behavior. That's just, it's despicable to me. I can't wait until November 6th is over. This is a microcosm of what's going on in our nation's capital. And if we have to, we will get rid of those people who are not willing, able to listen to their constituents. I've never seen this board, I've never seen any board do what this board has been doing. It's like a dictatorship led by Gary Tofinelli. And it's really makes me unhappy. I served my country during the Vietnam War. I was a combat infantry soldier. And anybody who has served can really understand what goes on with those people who have served. We have two people on the board who have served, Michael Oliveira in the Marine Corps and Jack Garamendi in the U.S. Army. They understand what's going on, and they have understood from January 1 of this year until now what's going on. They're the only two that, get it. I usually wear, from time to time, a t-shirt that says, "Are you kidding me?" And I think it's very appropriate for certain members on this board. Are you kidding me?
Other public comments?
Good morning, gentlemen, ladies. Again, I wasn't going to speak, but can't help myself at times. I've been sitting here watching these proceedings. You might recognize me for a few years now, pretty regular. And this morning is a microcosm of what I've been watching since this new board took its place. We have 3 supervisors that show, supervisors from districts 1, 2, and 3, show respect to the public. Supervisor from District 4 sometimes does, and a supervisor from District 5 barely does. Call it piling on, call it whatever you want, but this is the only time I can speak, because apparently what the public says in these chambers doesn't matter. This morning was a perfect example of District 4's in and out ability to pay attention. You 3 pay attention all the time. Mr. Mills, you espouse the wonders of fire protection, and you always manage to bring up and point out how you went on strike teams all over the state, and you're really in support of fire departments and how we have to have them. But yet a young lady spoke from Mountain Ranch about the problems with District 2, and you might have listened to her for a third of the time she was speaking. The rest of the time you were looking down. Mr. Clapp, just like he's doing now, looks down all the time if there's someone up here that does not agree with him. Now, what kind of representation is that? If I don't agree with you, I'm not going to listen to you. Is that the kind of people running our county? Now he's listening to me because I've referred to him specifically. You guys, you 3 will sit up here and listen to anything anyone has to say and show them respect. And I appreciate that. Don't always agree with you, but I appreciate the fact that you listen to everyone. 2 supervisors could learn from that. 1 specifically could learn from it. It's just called respecting the public, whether you agree with them or not. Why do you think we're piling on you? Your actions up here leave us no choice.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Move on to the consent agenda. Madam Clerk.
Consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested party may request removal of an item from the consent agenda for later discussion.
Does any board member wish to remove an item from the consent?
Number 5.
Supervisor Garamendi, item number 5.
Chair, I won't be removing any items, but I would like to comment on some things here before we adopt.
Okay, when we bring it back for motion.
Correct. Thank you.
Any member of staff wish to pull an item? No. Any member of public wish to pull an item off consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for a motion for the remainder. And Supervisor Mills, you want to make a comment first?
Yes. As noted in emails to staff, I would defer to item number 4. And the financial breakdown that is shown for item number 4, we see where the money's going. We have the account numbers to which these funds are being assigned, et cetera. I think it's important for us as a board when we make these decisions that we know what funds are being obligated to what accounts and where are we paying the money from. So the account numbers are important because that's what we see when we look at our budget books. That's what we see when we look at where funds are being transferred from. So I would ask all departments that when they bring forward something, simply because it's not obligating the general fund by itself, doesn't mean that we don't need to know what fund is being obligated and to what extent. That is my only comment.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move it.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mills. Do we have a second? No. Excuse me, Supervisor Clapp. Excuse me.
I'll second.
And we have a second by Supervisor Mills. Any other comments? If not, call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Item
Clerk,
Item
number
5 is from Human Resources to adopt a resolution authorizing replacement of the Emergency Services Disaster Recovery Coordinator job description with Emergency Services Coordinator job description.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you. Judy, you'll be taking this one on? Ms. Hawkins?
I'm going to share it with Michelle.
Oh, there. My concerns were primarily, and I apologize I didn't get in front of this, but we're changing the title, and we're obviously changing the direction that this position has taken. The past, as it's currently written, was really, we've got about $14, $15 million of disaster recovery money we're still trying to get. We've got Butte Fire cleanup still going on. We've got the disasters over on Highway 4. We got tree mortality. And this position was written to take on, really, in many ways, push the paper and make sure we get everything done correctly so we could recover and get those funds. The next one, the new job description, is all forward-looking and preparing for the next disaster, which we have to do as well. I'm worried that we're going to lose focus on finishing the disasters that are currently underway, and I want to know how we're going to maintain that I'm all for looking forward, but we got to take care of what's happened in the past. So I want to know how this is going to interact and how that's all going to work.
All right, I'm going to let Michelle answer this.
There you go.
And I know if I can add to while Michelle makes her way up here, please keep going, that I know Supervisor Garamendi and I had a conversation on this last night as well. And, one of the challenges, and I'll just add before Michelle responds, add this piece is this was a consideration when these positions were developed. I think the challenge is with a lot of our departments where we are trying to work with the resources we have and trying to do a lot of things. Both sides of the house are needed, the accounting side and also the response and operations side. And where I think Ms. Hawkins would attest to and where some of the questions came up is being the original spec as created tried to do too much and tried to cram accounting functions with operations functions that made it really difficult to find any person to fill that role. And so part of our discussion and calculus has been how then do we move forward, which I think is very much relevant to your point. Is this the path that we want to move forward in? I don't think that any of us would argue that both sides are important. The question for this spec is we also need to update this to net a successful candidate, and right now as written we don't feel that that's likely.
I know we discussed this last night, Tim, on the phone, but you've definitely got an accounting type person, and then you've got a planning type person, and maybe we can't find someone who can do all of that. You are definitely a great planning person, and you understand this. So I'm thinking, my thought would be it's probably easier to find the accounting person and train them to become the disaster preparedness person, rather than find a disaster preparedness person who wants to become an accountant and figuring out how to keep this paper moving. So I want to make sure we have complementary skills in your office. And as I've expressed, I have great fear that we're going to forget to clean up messes that happened in the past, which obviously you're not responsible for, but you've got the title, and so does Mr. Lutz, to figure out how we move forward. So I would like to have confidence that those things are going to happen and that this is in the right position, because it's pretty hard to train. Different skills are hard to acquire, so help me understand.
So, Michelle Patterson, OES Director. I concur completely with what Mr. Lutz said regarding the recruitment for the original disaster recovery coordinator position. If you'll recall, this position was vacant from the time it was created until April 30th of this year. And in speaking with my predecessor in the director role, the challenge is finding somebody who does have that accounting background and also an emergency services background. Those two don't typically go hand in hand. If you find somebody that's got both of those skill sets, that's pretty lucky. So where you said that it would be easier to find an accountant person to train them to be an emergency services coordinator, I respectfully disagree with that. Emergency management is a large task. It is a whole field in and of itself, as is accounting. And so if you were to ask me to be an accountant, that wouldn't be a good blend of my skill set at that point. I think with where we're at as far as disaster recovery is concerned, my office has really taken it to the point where now it needs to transition to those that are qualified to be managing roads projects. I'm not a construction person, I'm not an engineer, and so where that occurs is in public works. And so while OES is still part of the puzzle of the disaster recovery and still the liaison to the money and making sure that timelines are met, extension requests are granted, we need to move those projects back to where they belong, back to the folks that are qualified to be doing them. And looking forward, we still have a lot of preparedness that we need to do in this county. We have a lot in the realm of preparedness and response and mitigation projects. I was approached yesterday about participating in a mitigation grant project. You know, we've got a lot of work that we need to do on both sides of looking backwards and looking forward. And in order to set emergency management up in this county for its best success, we really need to start looking forward with this position.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand that you may not want to be trained back to be an accountant, but I'm wondering, you know, because you do have this skill set, if we had someone who provided that as a complementary skill. And I really hate getting into personnel details on this because I don't think that's frankly our job, but I have grave concerns about shifting this out of your office, as you're well aware. We did have it in Public Works, and it didn't work, and we've been cleaning up, trying to get these things done, and I'm worried that we're going to lose our momentum, and this will be in the background and won't get done. So, you know, I'm not comfortable with this shift. I want to make sure these things get done. We should be able to wrap this thing up someday. Tim?
And I know you know we had a meeting on this very topic, and you know my stance and statement. Part of the restructure within Public Works with transit not being in Public Works, with IWM being in the administrative office, is about letting Public Works build up its core competency as a public works organization. And to Ms. Patterson's point, that's road projects within recovery.
So let's just get this all on the record. So who is going to be responsible for getting these FEMA and highway monies in place and this work done?
As the recovery and coordination organization, that is OES, which is also under the county administrative office. So by definition, then I am.
Okay, so you're going to be accountable for delivering this?
Yes.
Okay. I'm still not comfortable. I think we're making a mistake here, but I will trust your judgment.
Any public comments or any board comments before we move forward
Dennis, you were first.
on this issue?
Yes, Michelle, you didn't need to walk away from the podium.
Come on.
Yeah,
Get your steps in for today.
You know, some of us do remember the history of OES during the Butte Fire, and where were the manuals, where were the policies and the guidelines, and if we're going to go forward, we need to have a complete and thorough review of those guidelines, and this position that you're asking to do here, how it's laid out, really speaks to those core issues that we have, and trying to ensure. It's just like in fire, you have pre-fire planning that you go through, especially in commercial locations. Well, this is the same thing, as just that there's so many pieces that really have not been reviewed in a lot of years, and I have to go back to Clay Hawkins and 15, 20 years ago as to where it was then versus what it is now. You have your work cut out for you. It's not just about repairing. It's not just about repairing the roads. It's about all of the other things that we need to get ready for in the future to prevent the disaster, what I call the post-disaster disaster, from occurring. And so I fully support the idea of moving this into a planning phase. I fully trust that you will continue to be successful in completing those phases of the disaster recovery that we're in the middle of now, the many pieces of it. So I just think it's important that we start looking and being more forward-thinking in what we're doing as we move forward. So I appreciate your time.
Supervisor Oliveira, your light's on. You have comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to try to simplify this a little bit. And I can only do that by going back through historical issues and incidents. This new position that we're proposing now, what exactly would be the responsibilities? And we'll take the example of the Murphy's Bridge and the Blagan Bridge. Those were instituted back in the old system of Public Works doing everything. And that did not work. We found that out. We recently had Jeremy on board, which is a great asset, but unfortunately he's no longer with us by his own choosing. So in the Murphy's Drive incident, we're held up because of certain certifications and permits. Would that be in OES or in this position as the assistant? Tell me who's responsible for what.
So as it pertains specifically to Murphy's Drive, all of those balls are all in the other agency's court. We are waiting for a response back from for a Clean Water Act permit. We need to apply for a stream bed alteration permit. We have a meeting on Friday, which is our kickoff meeting with the vendor who's doing the hydrology and hydraulic study. So that will get completed. At that point, once we have a response from a report, right, from the hydro study, that gets submitted to Cal OES and to FEMA to review for mitigation. They respond back to us at that point. I'm not qualified to read an engineering study, so it would be on Public Works to agree or disagree with that hydrology study and agree or disagree with the scope of work provided by FEMA for the fix to that particular site. I'm still a piece of the puzzle, but I'm not the owner of the puzzle. Somebody who has the qualifications of a civil engineer or public engineer needs to be involved in this process. It's beyond project management. We've brought it to a point where all of the paperwork side, the environmental permitting and the notices of exemption and things like that they're all lined up waiting for a response from another agency, whatever the cooperating agency is. So I will still continue to be the person to make sure that those pieces are complete, but it really is on Public Works to then ensure that what is provided by the firm doing the hydro study and the information provided by FEMA is put into the solution to that particular site.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Mr. Boyer, could I have you approach the microphone, please? Morning, Mr. Boyer. Thank you for coming in. Who in your department is working in coordination with OES on the Murphy's Drive and the Blagan Road issues?
So up until today, really nobody. Those projects, those FEMA-related projects, other than some informal consultation that I did with Jeremy, haven't been. Now, since then, we've sat down, Michelle and I, and talked about roles and responsibilities moving forward.
Would this position be an instrumental part of that process?
Well, I certainly think on the administrative compliance side of it, absolutely, because there are some unique aspects to the FEMA requirements that are not what public works departments normally deal with. The nuts and bolts of the projects should be right within our core competency. And I would say whatever the board wants Public Works to do looking forward, we're happy to do that. And I would not necessarily take past practice as being indicative of future, because we've made some tremendous retooling and improvements over the last couple of months that I think our department is very proud of.
Okay, I understand that. So, what has happened in the past did not work. Do we see this position as a cure for that, for future disasters?
The position on your agenda today,
Yes, well, the OES, you can both chime in on that one.
Yeah, they're going to collect the paper.
So
we
I'm
don't
gonna,
have-
I'm gonna steal this one from Matt. Is this the thing that's going to prevent us from being in this situation in the past? I would like to defer to what Dennis said in that I have been here for 7 months and have continued to hear about the failures in response to the various disaster incidents over the past several years. And to Dennis's point, there is a lot of planning and exercising and training and things that need to occur in this county for us to be successful and to successfully endure these types of events in the future. So is this position the key to solving these particular problems in public works? No. This position is the key to the broader emergency management health of this county. So this position can work on planning, can work with departments on training, can work with departments to understand their roles and responsibilities as far as recovery is concerned and response is concerned. Public Works is by far probably the most impacted department in major disasters because you've got the infrastructure damage, the road damage, the washout, all of the things that are related physically is, I mean, aside from private homes and things like that, the public infrastructure is by far one of the greatest impacts. And so if we can have a person who is planning and training and working with departments to understand the roles and responsibilities, understand the nuances of, you know, CDAA funds or FEMA public assistance funds, then we will be in a better position to endure these types of events in the future. If we can't get to that point where we're having somebody doing planning and training and working during blue skies to ensure we're in a better spot, we're going to continue to be in this cycle of trying to clean up the past.
React instead of proactive.
If, we don't-
I'll reserve some comments, go ahead.
okay. Just a quick question. Just follow up to your comment, Matt. You said until today, things changed. What changed today? In your comments or yesterday?
Oh, just meaning that in recent conversations that Michelle and I have had about the remaining projects, so we have the 5 remaining FEMA projects that are relatively
Right.
large. We have the 20 plus or minus federal highways projects looking forward. Frankly, regardless of which department they're assigned to as the lead, all of those projects are intensely public works engineering oriented projects. The 90 or plus or minus that OES was able to accomplish with public works crews doing the work were more like you and I doing stuff in our backyard and restoring what was there, and that's really within our maintenance crews competency. Jeremy and Michelle were awesome getting through all of the paperwork and making sure we had the financial and administrative compliance associated with that. So maybe the piece that I would asterisk is I've assumed that regardless of sort of this position and what your board directs, that ultimately Public Works is going to have a major role in all those remaining projects just by the nature of what they are.
I know my main concern is accountability, and I want to make sure that we're accountable to everybody. We're accountable to our citizens. You're accountable to our citizens and the board as well. Last month, we approved a position from Public Health to come over and work in OES, and memory serves, that was a very forward-looking position for planning as well. So now we'll have 3 forward-looking planners. Who's in my since I've come on the board, the biggest problem I've seen after disaster response is disaster follow-up and the paperwork. So if everybody's looking forward, who's running the shop to keep the paperwork going? Because we'll put out a fire, but how we pay for it is a major concern for me personally. So how do these 3 positions, what is the overlap, and how does this fit in the overall strategy?
So I just want to clarify that the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Manager existed previously.
Right.
That position is funded by the CDC through the California Department of Public Health and is a public health position.
But works in your shop.
Well, I'm providing day-to-day oversight of
Right.
their grant programs because there is a lot of overlap between what they do and what OES does. And in order to create efficiencies and make sure that we're not working in separate silos, like we need to support each other in that. And the best way to do that is for them to be co-located in OES so that we can work together to achieve common goals. But that position still belongs to public health. That position is still dedicated only to the public health emergency preparedness programs. So they are not my staff in particular.
Okay, so they're not on paper your staff,
Correct.
but they are working in your shop under your direct supervision.
Yes.
They're your staff. So we don't have to do this right now, but I do have grave concerns about accountability. It sounds like we're punting the ball around here, and that causes me anxiety. The disasters that will be coming, we need to prepare for. But if there's any indication that we're forgetting about the disasters in the past, we'll continue to have this conversation because we have to wrap these things up. I think you would all agree. And when I see responsibility get passed like this, it makes me, somebody's got to be accountable. And I guess, Tim, you're ultimately accountable.
Maybe, Mr. Chair, if I could make two comments on that. To the extent that you hear any hesitancy from me, it's because I know that as the interim director, I'm not the one that's ultimately going to be here. And likely in the next 6 weeks or so, you're going to have a new public works director. So I could stand here and make a lot of definitive promises, but I know that those are somewhat hollow because you won't have me to directly hold accountable. The other point, and maybe I'll actually make two additional points. Second is, again, the remaining projects are inherently public works by orientation. And so they're not going to happen without a lot of coordination between OES and Public Works and the Chief Administrative Office. But the nuts and bolts of the work to be done will have to be done by the Public Works Department, regardless of who is at the top of the pyramid. Probably the third issue is we have done some really substantial retooling on our capital project side. We've got a couple of weeks more of additional work that we've got to do. As this board knows, we've got 40 or so active capital projects, not counting any of the emergency relief projects. We've got a backlog of SB1 projects. We haven't even begun getting those out on the road, but we're pretty close to a strategy on how to do that. Regardless, as I said earlier, regardless of who is at the top of the pyramid, Public Works is going to need to be significantly involved in the delivery of those projects. The way that I would plan on handling our part of that responsibility is to bring in separate resources from those that are working on our active projects, our SB1 projects, et cetera, so that we don't run into a circumstance where we have too few people doing too many jobs, and then what ends up happening in the real world is you do them all poorly. And if you want an example of what that looks like, you probably saw that a couple of years ago. So I think we're in a much better position to do it today. Public Works is going to have a substantial role. If I was here, I would be more definitive in terms of my confidence that would happen, but I'm fairly confident that new Public Works Director would be just as competent in getting them done. Thank you.
Supervisor Mills.
Thank you. Michelle, you said some key words there, and that's roles and responsibilities. And in the ICS system, as you come on scene and you start to develop your base group, that logistics piece is the one that, but if there's no one trained to do it, there's no one trained to understand how to do it, you're left with a problem. And that's kind of where we're at here, or we've been at, is that those roles and responsibilities have to be clearly defined, but they also need to be trained into people to understand how to do them. But with just putting it on paper doesn't get it done. You're going to be spending a lot of time doing training classes, doing certifications, and to ensure that the people that you're calling on already understand what it is they need to be doing, when they need to be doing it. And the worst thing in the world is, is self-dispatching. And that too many times people want to come in and they'll want to help, but you don't know that they have the capability, they don't have the capacity, and they don't have the ability. And so that's really where everything starts to fall apart. And so the more time we spend up front in being sure that we're putting together a solid package in planning documents and in training documents, the better able we'll be able to withstand those emergencies as they come into our field view. So that is my point, is that these roles and responsibilities are so critical. I've seen it over and over again, and there's times where even in fire districts where they've been told we don't want you on a strike team simply because we know you can't do it. Where there's others that are always being called because they know they could do it. And the same thing holds true with your positions in OES and all the things you're trying to get done, is the planning element is the key, along with the training to back it up. And I hope I'm just not preaching to the choir here.
Well, I understand Supervisor Garamendi's issue with this going forward is you came on 7 months ago, we were floundering. It's not Public Works not being able to do the work, because they did the work. It's in between getting to that position through FEMA or Cal OES and getting the funding in place and getting their okay and getting all the paperwork filed. That's the problem that he's having an issue with, turning it back over there. And I'm not saying we can't move forward on it. And I want to commend Michelle for her stance and her attack on how to handle OES, because planning is the key. We've lacked that. You need to identify the areas in the county that are prone to disasters, like Cosco Creek overflowing, major flows there, a fire going through Paloma, and then putting your attack plan together in case that happens. Everybody's on board and knows what's going. This key, that's totally key. Now the cleanup afterwards and getting the paperwork filed with the state, with the feds, and getting that funding available to Public Works going forward to do the project. I have no problem. They did the work that's out there right now in District 2 and working on going up to District 4. 3. That's the issue here in going forward. And Tim being on board and his crew being on board, I think we're a little bit further along in that area if he's going to take control of it and make sure that is getting done in hand with Public Works. That I'm willing to give it a try. We can always come back and say it's not working and we need a different plan. But I think the planning part of it is very much a key. And the other things, once the planning is there, I think it may be easier to move along, because you certainly have the experience in how to move these along. You came in 7 months and got the ball rolling and so forth, that we can always fall back on your help if it starts languishing to get that done. So I'm willing to give it a try. So, public comments on this issue.
So I hear we have 40 projects in Public Works. Why would we go ahead and do a repaving of Little John Road when Mr. Pitto has been complaining about how the road is, Gwen Mine Road? I just don't get it. And nobody's willing to be transparent about how Little John Road got repaved. I was there the day it was being repaved. I could see the old section and I could see the new section. That road didn't have any more business being paved as somebody in the public observing than what I've seen on Gwen Mine Road. Now this may be far a few, but I just hope we can get on with it and stop procrastinating. There are many roads in Supervisor Garamendi's district that haven't been looked at. Some of them have, some of them haven't. But I am concerned that we have an interim public works director. I don't know when they're going to select a new one. We're going to have another fall back when that happens, because that person is going to have some time to get up to snuff. So transportation in this county is poor at best. The only highways that are really well done are the state highways. Thank you.
Other public comments?
Good morning, Alice Gallant, Taxpayer Association. Michelle was on our program, Taxpayer Alert, gave a good background, and it's a half-hour program, and you can't, of course, do that over here, but that'd be worth watching to get to hear from her the different parts to the things that she does. Thank you.
Other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close public comments, come back to the board. Looking for a motion.
I'll move the item.
We have a motion by Supervisor Mills. We have a second.
I'll second it.
We have a second by Supervisor Clapp.
Comment before the board, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
Supervisor Olivera.
I want to make sure that we're perfectly clear on this, not only the board, our departments, and our folks out there. I have 2 issues in my district that are going on 3 years old. I hope this is a Band-Aid to the complete recovery of those issues. I will support this position request, but I want to make sure it's done and doesn't fall through the cracks, or doesn't get done because we lack resources. Ms. Patterson, you've done an outstanding job. I've worked closely with you. Mr. Boyer, I've worked closely with you on projects. My fear is we're going to get pushed back again. Don't let that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Garamendi.
I'm just going to echo Mike's comments. You know, I have great confidence in you both. You've done nothing but show us that you can do things. I have grave reservations about this, and we're going to be watching it very closely. Thank you.
So, call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. We will take a 15-minute break. We're back.
Item 11 is from the Administrative Office to receive an update from the county's federal lobbyist and provide direction to the County Administrative Officer on the federal legislative priorities for the 2018-19 fiscal year.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, just as a brief introduction, Mia O'Connell, who is the contracted lobbyist for the county. The goal behind today's meeting was for her to have an opportunity to summarize her conversations individually with each member of the board, but then also our conversations as we developed kind of the framework for what the board wanted to see come back for the legislative platform. So my hope is to, one, kind of provide that summary, but then also provide a good opportunity for deliberation on what the board would ultimately like to see for this year's federal lobbyist platform, that hopefully what Ms. O'Connell will help overlay is what also is seen as feasible given what's happening at the federal level and what she feels is realistic for us to ask for. So thank you for making the trip out here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for your support. It's wonderful to be here today. My name is Mia O'Connell of O'Connell and Dempsey, your federal advocate in Washington, D.C. What I'd like to do today in terms of our objective as Mr. Lutz laid out, is really kind of take a look at, as a result of our individual discussions at the end of July, really take a look at some of the common areas that I heard from each of you after I sat down and kind of assessed what I heard, and determine, are these the priority areas that we want to pursue in terms of federal funding, and really define objectives for us, and the outcomes. What do we want to see come out of this exercise through federal engagement? So this is, as Mr. Lutz laid out, this discussion and analysis will really form the basis for the county's federal legislative platform. So just to recap a little bit, at the end of July, we had, I was privileged to have discussions with each and every one of you talking about the priorities for your district, for yourselves, for your communities, within the scope of our agreement and the areas of consequence, which were water resources, forest management, and rural development. And I have to say thank you for taking the time. Those were fantastic conversations for me coming into this to really understand what was going on in your communities, your districts, and for yourselves and your aspirations. So it was a great way for me to start, and thank you, Mr. Lutz, for asking me to do that. It was my pleasure. So out of those discussions, I saw some common areas between all of you. We went off on some wide-ranging discussions, but we came down to some kind of common areas that I wanted to spend some time on, and let's just run through those quickly. Number one is one I know you've been grappling with, just heard it again, removal of the hazardous trees on the BLM lands. Secondly, federal funds for healthy watersheds, healthy forests, kind of the bigger picture there. Broadband access, I would say that each and every one of you brought that up to me to deal with in the county and get that as a much better coverage than what we have today. A need for a job training center. I heard from several of you on this, coming from different perspectives, so it was kind of interesting to hear discussions about training our young people and others in the community to do forest management, for example, or to provide training for some of the other growth industries, but medical and this sort of thing, to kind of create a hub so that we can provide some economic development, so that we can give some hope to young people and others in the community in terms of their careers and taking care of their families, and I think that's exactly where we should be going. I just heard reference to Cosgrove Creek. When a number of years ago, I was working with CCWD and Supervisor Taffanelli on getting the Corps to look at the reoccurrent flooding issues at Cosgrove Creek, and we took the time with the Corps to kind of work them over a little bit. I'm kind of dusting off what they had done. We really looked at, yes, flood protection is the main purpose, but then we went broader to make it more of a multi-purpose kind of effort, looking at some water supply issues, reusing some of those return flows, as well as creating some recreation opportunities for the community within the confines of the project, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The final area that I think was a piece of the consensus was aging infrastructure and looking at federal funds for both failing water supply and wastewater treatment facilities, and the idea of stemming the water rate increases locally by hopefully bringing in some federal dollars for that. In terms of challenges, I heard a few this morning, and we'll continue down that road, but I would say that if the board agrees that these 6 areas that we identified as consensus areas, if you believe these are priorities for us to pursue for a legislative program, and I understand, and I could hear it today, that I think these areas are reflective of what the broader stakeholder need is and what you've been working with over the last couple of years, then let's go ahead and define objectives for those areas. You know, the challenges are many. We've identified some broader areas, so we're going to have to create some very clear objectives so we can narrow down on things that are really going to help the communities, and outcomes, very importantly. The reality, and I don't need to tell you this, but it just, you know, I want to say it here at the beginning, you know, this is a multi-year effort. Working with the federal government and working with Congress and the agencies takes time. We have to, you know, work through their processes. Of course, part of my job as I see it is to identify federal opportunities, grant opportunities as they come up. Sometimes it's kind of unpredictable as they come up, but that's part of my job, to be monitoring that, bringing that up to Mr. Lutz and his team. We make an assessment on whether this is a good area for us, whether it's worth our staff time to pursue it, and we go forward for that. That will be happening on an ongoing basis. In addition to that, as we work on our larger portfolio of issues, just want to remind you that each and every agency has their own little processes, so we'll be working through those, and they take some time. But this is nothing new, but I just state the obvious for you. So in terms of our approach for today, I thought what we do is review these 6 areas and give me an opportunity to hear from you, and also to hear from me on what I see in terms of federal funding and whether it's worth it for us to pursue these areas, and to make sure that these are areas that you want pursued. Discuss each, determine the objectives and the outcomes, and you know, make sure that we can have a good basis for our legislative platform, because I'll take today's discussions back with me and shape that draft platform and send it on to Mr. Lutz for his consideration in moving it forward to you. So I want to make sure we're all on the same place together. So without further ado, let's get right into the first issue that I heard very commonly between all of you, the removal of the hazardous trees from the BLM lands. You know, the local issues that I heard from you, you know, are obvious. I don't need to state all of them, but the threat to public health and safety, of course, the cost, you know, is more than the county should bear. Plus, it's you know, our view is that it's not our cost. These are BLM lands. This is their responsibility as the landowner. In addition, and Michelle and I were just talking about this, the extensive pre-removal activities. These are costly. The environmental, the rest of the studies, all of that has to be factored in as well. In terms of opportunities for federal funds, out of the meeting that Supervisor Garamendi had with the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science this summer in July, Austin Ewell, he was out to talk with CCWD on New Melones and water supply issues. We took that time for Supervisor Garamendi to visit with Mr. Ewell on these issues, present a letter. We've been in the process of following that up. And also, Mr. Ewell directed us to the acting chief of staff for BLM, so I've been in touch with her directly on our issues. At the same time, we've also reached out to Congressman McClintock to ask him to reach out to Department of Interior, and he has. All of those threads are now pulling together for us in that this issue is being raised within the department. We are now in the process of setting up a follow-up meeting for me, but it will be a call in with the supervisor and whomever wants to join in, and basically a follow-up to Mr. Ewell's visit out here, and really just kind of a device to continue the pressure and to get the remedy, which, you know, is the federal funding. Right now, the state of discussions is I've been coordinating with Michelle and Mr. Lutz on, you know, kind of what's the nature of the problem, what's the depth of the problem, how much money are we talking about, what's the nature of the discussions, you know, what's the acreage involved. So really now we're getting into the detail in discussions at headquarters on this issue. So, and I've also taken some time to talk to them about some funding streams that they have. This is, you know, BLM does not have, you know, the funds, let's say, that the Corps of Engineers does. I mean, they just don't. So we know that. but we still pursue. It's their responsibility, and the squeaky wheel continues. So we've got, we'll be meeting again with Mr. Ewell probably at the beginning of October to revisit these issues, but basically right below that at the working level, I'm dealing directly with the acting chief of staff at BLM, who seems very motivated to work with us to understand the nature of the amount of money. One of the things that we talked about was this summer BLM put out a draft environmental assessment that some of you may know about on a suite of actions for our area and several other areas in the state that is exactly on point. It's for hazard removal and vegetative management. And, you know, BLM's a little bit different in that they just don't have these regular programs. They come out with, you know, kind of these projects, a range of activities for certain areas. So the environmental assessment that they have out now, and they're reviewing the comments, could provide the kind of assistance we need, and it's right on track. And I've mentioned that to the acting chief of staff. So we're in discussions. I feel like we're making some progress there. I'll be in close touch with Mr. Lutz as things progress. So we are well in the hunt for the pursuit of federal funds for the BLM hazardous trees. There's, you know, a number of other programs that BLM has that are a little bit smaller. The forest ecosystem for forest management programs, just to give you a scale, nationwide $10 million for BLM. It's not a huge amount of money, but they also get a little bit over $7 million for forest ecosystem health and restoration. So they kind of, you know, have several pots, and then they go out and do suites of actions, kind of these project approaches. We're trying to jump in there on one of them right now that's under consideration. So, you know, I feel like we are making some progress here on this issue. Obviously, one of the outcomes we'd like to see in the near term is a commitment from the Department of Interior to go forward on the funding, and then the successful pursuit of funds under this program and any other way that we can for BLM activities. So that's kind of the state of play right here. Jumped into it quickly, and I think we're making some progress at headquarters. Questions on that issue before we move on to any of the others?
I was just wondering how many millions of acres BLM has under their management for only 10 million forested acres. It sounds like 25 cents an acre or less.
It's a very bad proportion. And that's what we've run into. You know, when they say they have no money, okay. So the good news is here we are at the beginning of a new fiscal year. Congress is grappling right now about fiscal year 19 funds, desperately trying to pull a package together before the elections. So it'll be a fresh pot of money, let's just, for the new year once they get through it. It'll be a rough couple of months, I would suspect. Probably a lame duck session too. But you know, they will fund the federal government, and we will have some funds available to us. Right now, it's getting ourselves to the top of the heap. That's what's happening. But you're right. You know, the percentage is way off. It's not appropriate, you know, for managing the lands the way they need to. I think one of the supervisors had mentioned to me in the call, you know, for the last 40 years, you know, they've seen bad management. Now we're starting to pay the price. Anything else that you would like to add on this one?
On the BLM piece,
yes.
too, is that the amount of manpower is available in our area versus,
right.
say, for instance, Army Corps, is substantially lower. I think it's, 3 people total for this whole area. So it's an unmanageable situation because of the limited ability we have to find somebody to deal with directly on a specific issue on a BLM piece of property.
And
they're
that's exactly
scattered all over the place.
right.
I mean, these are sometimes little 1-acre parcels that are out in the middle of nowhere, And it's just amazing how many, some of them are old mining claims, for instance.
Yeah.
So that's part of the issue is that who do you talk to? And then when you do, what kind of financial help can you get in getting something done?
Right. So that's our role, to elevate your issues, given the, the fact that they don't have enough money for the acres. We get, these are small parcels. They don't have the staff. Get it, okay? But this is too important to worry, to leave it there, right? So that's why we elevate it. That's why we bring it up to the assistant secretary. That's why we have the congressman involved. That's why I'm on it persistently. The odds are not great, but we are, one way or another, going to get ourselves there.
And another advantage too is Mr. Yule actually did live in Copperopolis at one time, so he has a vested interest in Calaveras County, and he understands the county.
right.
He understands our issues very directly, which is immensely helpful when you're having those conversations back there.
Exactly. And we kind of found our way to him last spring when CCWD was out, and it was, within minutes. I had heard that he had come from this area, but within minutes of our visit, it was clear he had a good and deep interest and a lot of care for what was going on here, and wanted, was familiar, but also wants a resolution. You don't find that often in life, somebody who's that dedicated to it. So that's why, we're happy to work with him, and he's anxious to see something happen here. So, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate where we're moving on this in this discussion too.
Pleasure.
One of the issues that we run into is that we can't use federal dollar, speaking not about BLM broadly, but about Butte Fire. We can't use federal dollars on federal lands. We can't use FEMA to deal with BLM. BLM doesn't have any money. That seems pretty clear
It's
for the
a
scale
house
of their
of-
problem.
yeah.
Is there any chance we get some sort of waiver that FEMA might be able to help us out? Because this could conceivably come under the hazard tree removal from the Butte Fire. Is that just ridiculously impossible?
No, I think where we're at right now with basically the chief of staff for BLM asking us the nature of our problems and the details, I can certainly bring up something like that. Hey, we've run into this, house of mirrors situation where, we can't use other federal, funds on, federal property. I'm sure you've run into this before. I'm sure you've fixed it before. Is there an avenue, if BLM doesn't have the funds, is there another avenue to put that aside for purposes of emergency relief? I mean, this is the nature of it.
It's a life and safety issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If we're done with that particular issue for the moment, want to move on to federal funds for healthy watersheds and healthy forests. I think Supervisor Mills, it was in our discussion where you pointed out, the healthy watersheds. If you manage them properly, we can actually see an increase in the water supply. Very true, very important for our area. I think one of the other issues that we also heard, that I heard in the discussions, was kind of this important push for local management of some of these issues, or at least local involvement in a serious way in the management of our forests. We're here, you guys are the experts, we've got people who understand this stuff. So, I wanted to sort through that issue and see how we can help ourselves with that, and there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about on that. Let me move to kind of the federal opportunities, and then we can get into this idea of local management a little bit more. One of the areas that I think is probably going to be most productive is the Forest Service Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. Their big program. It's been $40 million a year they handle it a little bit differently. This is where the Amador Calaveras Consensus Group got funded. There's a selection. You know, you put your grant application in, very detailed, and then there's a selection process, and you're not selected just for that year. You're selected for your whole program. So in the case of this last round, it was basically a 10-year program for each of those candidates that were selected. So you can really, change your conditions and have a full program. This is not a year to year. So this is, we'd love to get into that kind of a space. What we have right now is this program is running out of authorization. In the Farm Bill that's in conference right now between the House and the Senate, there is a provision to reauthorize this program, but at a much higher level, $80 million. So doubling the authorization to recognize there's a big need across the country for something like this. So we have to have a couple of things happen here. We have to have a successful conference on the Farm Bill and get that provision out, get the president to sign that into law, all a few matters there. But it's on a good course, and it is in the final stages in conference. Both the House and Senate have the same provision. So it would be a very good opportunity for us, assuming it is enacted into law, and then Congress has been funding it at the top level up to the $40 million each year. So this authorization would be a steep jump up to 80. But if the House and Senate agrees to the authorization, looking at the last 10 years of history, one could say that they're also going to fund it at those kinds of levels. So all of this is to say that we have an opportunity coming up. It's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but we need time to prepare for it. This is probably one of the best opportunities we have for kind of a larger landscape look at what we can do in terms of a management plan for ourselves on our Forest Service land. So that is in process. I'll be briefing Mr. Lutz on the development, and hopefully we'll see final agreement on this and Farm Bill signed into law. Another opportunity is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, who works, and many of you may know about them. They work hand in hand. They're a private foundation, but they work with Fish and Wildlife Service and some other of the bureaus within Department of Interior as kind of their project manager. Federal funds flow through them, and they do a lot of the selection process and the management of the grants. They came out with this Pacific Southwest Fuels Management Program, and it was right around the time when we were getting on board, and I sent something to Mr. Lutz. It was really late in the process, but this will come up again, and so this is another opportunity. The funds that, at least we've seen over the last couple of years, aren't a huge amount of money, but anywhere in the $50,000 to $500,000, it can be used for not only implementation, but planning. So my thought is perhaps if we can get some planning funds to work towards this collaborative, bigger picture effort, that would be good, because under the collaborative, that is not for planning, that is for implementation. So we have to get some planning funds on board, and this would be a good opportunity for that. Another area that we've identified, and as I said, this is going to be iterative. Federal opportunities will come, but as we stand here today, this is what we have. NRCS works closely with the Forest Service on what they call a Joint Chiefs Landscape Program. And again, this is a funding program. This is for kind of public forests and grasslands and where they intersect with public and private property to look at new management techniques. So it's basically two agencies within USDA kind of teaming up on what projects should be. It's a little bit different in that it's not a competitive grant, so we would have to use the delegation to highlight our request. I expect this will be coming out again next year. So this is just another place where we could go for some planning funds that I think might be useful for us. The other area I wanted to touch on is, I don't know if any of you have been involved in it, getting back to this idea of local management and having a little bit more to say about how our national forests are being managed. There will be, in talking to Congressman McClintock's office, they've been advised that there's going to be a reopening of the Stanislaus National Forest Management Plan. I think that's the beginning of next year is what it sounds like to me. There's a whole involved process that involves the stakeholders. It involves local governments. And we need to be a part of that. I think this is a way for us to, put a little bit of our stake in the ground about how the forests are managed, in our area. And we can be a part of that. And McClintock's office is interested in having us be a part of that. So we will be staying in close touch with them as this is reopened. But I think that is a great place for us to be as a stakeholder to really talk about our point of view about what the management plan should look like. So that's another administrative opportunity, but it's out there, and I think it's an exciting one for us. So in terms of outcomes, it all turns on federal funds and getting those federal dollars. So I think that's what we're looking at. If we could get ourselves, assuming passage of the Farm Bill, to kind of a developed, partnered application where we could submit it and that would be funded. Obviously that would be a tremendous outcome for us under this larger collaborative landscape project. Or, there'll be other programs too, but I think the idea of being able to pull ourselves together locally with other partners and start some planning on what we want to see in terms of projects that can be funded by the federal government. Of course, each of them are going to be a little bit different, but if we can lay a little bit of groundwork so that when the opportunities do come up, we can say, okay, here's what we have to do. We have something in place. We have partners in place. Here's how we're going to pursue it. You've done some of that. I think maybe we want to bring it up to a little bit higher level so we are positioned and can take advantage of the opportunities when they come forward. I think in terms of the outcomes, we want to see federal funds for, a successful partnership that will be approved for this program, the collaborative program, and others as we see them come forward for both the watersheds and the forests on kind of a, looking forward sort of basis. We're trying to deal with the instant case, of course, tree mortality, but we also want to go forward with a vision for our community about, how those forests should be managed. So that's kind of an outcome I'm thinking about. Yes.
So any of those funding sources that you show there, will those funds be able to be used on BLM forests for restoration or clearing?
These individual ones, I don't know the answer to all of them. I would say the collaborative one is Forest Service.
First one on the list.
Yeah, and that's the big one. That's Forest Service lands.
First one to pursue then, because we have a lot of BLM land. Yeah.
What is the, I should know this, what is the proportion?
Okay.
Do we, in terms of, for this county, BLM versus Forest Service, it's like a 30%?
Federal land in Calaveras County is 24.6%. But that includes BLM, that includes all of the Stanislaus Forest and all of that.
Yeah, National Forest and all.
Yeah.
That's the total.
Okay.
But as Dennis pointed out, BLM is pocketed in areas
Yes.
Yeah.
And that
You
makes
need
it
to
more
clear
of a
out to
challenge.
this point, and you have to walk away from it. The funding won't allow you to do it, that we're talking about removing trees here. So I think the whole thing would be, let's find the funding source that allow us to go in and do everything once we go in and do it. So we
Right.
walk out of it, it's yeah.
Part of the challenge will be, as you point out, different pots of money for different kinds of activities on different lands. So to the extent on the BLM piece of it, we have a good exchange going on now. We're a little bit in the driver's seat about talking about the acreage. They've asked us for that, and so we're working that to make sure that we've got, the maximum defensible, right, number. And so it's going to be iterative depending on the program. But I get your point in that, it's not just all in one little common area. There's pockets. So that makes it tougher. So, we're not really interested in just a one shot and we're done, because it's not going to work that way perfectly. I get that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Mia, additionally, we have had NRCS projects in Calaveras County.
Yeah.
We had one I know of in 2016 down in Jenny Lind. So it was a conversion to grazing land project. So it is something that we've had activity with here in the county. Also, we're the last county in California to adopt a resource conservation district. We did that at the voters in November of 2016. So it's a fledgling group. And that creates a challenge for us, because right now we've had meetings with the federal forest over a master stewardship agreement to mirror the one in Tuolumne County. The only issue is who's going to sponsor. So you have YSS and other project sponsors in Tuolumne County. RRCD isn't at the level right now necessary to do it. So that really becomes a hinge. We've got the capability, but we don't have the administrative ability to handle. And so it's going to take some time to put that together.
Right.
But the soon as we can develop that master stewardship agreement, that's going to open the door on the federal side, because we'll be able to access federal lands with state dollars or local dollars that are not currently an option that's available to us. And they're in full agreement to want to do that. And call it a hug, if you will. But it works. And so, and it's proven itself. Look at the $7 million that was recently received over in Tuolumne County, over their MSA. So there's money available. It's just a matter of us being able to be positioned to be able to do with it what needs to be done. And so is the I would love the RCD to be the administrator on these grants and to be able to handle them. They're just not quite ready yet.
Right.
So.
Yeah, don't let a process be the impediment to progress.
Correct.
We will. There's also UMRA, Upper McCalmay Watershed River UMRA, which has been administering state as a master stewardship agreement. It's been administering really many millions of dollars in the national forest. So good to have the umbrella.
Yes.
There are vehicles. If money's there, as Des pointed out, we have the capacity.
Right. Okay. Okay. If we're done with that part of the discussion, let us move on to broadband. Again, another issue, and it struck me as I talked to each of you, each and every one of you brought this up. Clearly, major need, geographic challenges, as we know, the infrastructure assistance. I'm, coming up to the history that you've had. The good news is that there are some opportunities, USDA and EDA. I see funding available, the grants really through USDA. I think the Community Connect program will probably reopen again in March. We'll get ourselves positioned for that. The average grant that I've been seeing is about $100,000 to about $3 million. We're going to have to look, we always will, but look very carefully at the regulations in terms of eligibility and this sort of thing, because I know that we have some pockets of broadband, and each of these programs have different definitions of what's eligible, so we'll be working through that. But, this is to say that, there is a grant program under USDA that will be opening up again in March, so we'll be wanting to do some homework to prepare ourselves for an application there. USDA also has the loan and loan guarantee program, Also probably opening in March, again, for kind of construction and infrastructure and acquisition of facilities, a low-interest program that would be looking to tap into. And we'll be spending some time on precisely what our needs are and, kind of where in the county we're focusing based on each of the eligibility areas. Economic Development Administration, I don't know if you've run into them in your efforts, but, under kind of their Public Works program, the whole concept is, economic development, obviously job creation, this sort of thing. But as we looked at it closely, it ties into exactly what I think, our issue is, making sure that the county has access, to support job growth. Yes, we want it for every other reason too, but under that program, that's what they're looking for. And I think we can probably make a good case for that. In this case, the average grants that we've seen are about $1.5 million, not as large as what some of the other pieces, but they do have a range. It could be up to several $1 million. Kind of the average is that $1.5 million, but depending on precisely, how we want to pursue it. And by the way, when we do have some of you folks come out in, I think we're talking February range, maybe with in connection with CCWD, we'll be visiting EDA and USDA and NRCS and the Corps to talk about these opportunities, to talk about our needs, to make sure that we're on their program and taking advantage of, their notice of awards that are going out and to personalizing it, raising our profile so they understand who we are, and that when our members come knocking, when we've sent our application in, they know who we are and what our needs are. So it's all part of the communication in raising our profile and getting known out there. So we'll be doing that as well. So, all of this is to say there are some streams of funding that will be coming back online in the early spring. That's historically when we see a lot of these. EDA typically, has an open season essentially on their application until they run out of funds. So, we may be able to make an application before then. But, at this point, we're trying to shepherd and identify your biggest issues, the funding streams, and then going hard at it. And so I'm trying to manage the immediate stuff and then lay a platform for us going forward. So we'll be spending time on exactly what your needs are and what communities we're talking about so that we can really zone in on these opportunities and get the best bang for the buck.
I could speak directly to one particular
Please.
broadband situation that's occurring in the West Point area, and that is with Frank Leszewski and Volcano Telephone, who has that area, and they've been laying down a lot of fiber optic up there. It's a disadvantaged community, but it is something that they are very definitely focused on doing, but I don't see that same level of interest in a lot of the other portions of the county. So where Copperopolis has some of the highest speed internet in California, believe it or not, we have NASA people that live and telecommute from Copperopolis. That is a definite advantage if we could get telecommute capability in a lot of our other disadvantaged communities. So even San Andreas, right here, we don't have the full broadband capability that would allow us to get those people to want to live or reside right here. So I just use West Point as an example. We've got to get away from the hard lines. It's just not going to be the long-term solution. So I think Frank is a good contact when it comes to understanding the challenges of laying the fiber optics and getting that infrastructure put together.
Thank you. If there's any more discussion, we can do that now, or we can move on to the next area of consensus, which is the job training center idea. In our discussions, it was interesting to me because I heard this concept come up in a couple of different ways. First was, the idea of having a skilled workforce available on forest management issues. Others brought up, we just need to have skilled labor. We need to give people an opportunity to get those skills here so that we can keep them here in the county and move forward and create good futures for all of us. It's not something that I had heard before or that we had discussed before, but I thought I heard it enough. I would bring it forward to see if this is if there is a level of interest here. Again, I would say in terms of federal funding, EDA funds these types of operations. You can imagine they want to incentivize communities to train people to develop, placement and then move forward towards job creation. We've also seen USDA, and I don't know if you've worked with them, their rural business development grants. They obviously are focusing on communities like ours with the idea of trying to train people up for small business, entrepreneurship, and placement. So it's some interesting concepts there for your consideration, and there is some federal funds for this idea of job training centers. So I think, if this is an area that you want to pursue, there are some federal opportunities for funding for it.
Before we move from this slide,
Yep.
I think I was one of the originators of this program as far as our conversations. We do have some local programs in the very, very forming stages, if you will, working with the EDA funding with both school districts here. That's probably going to, that's a 2 to 5 year project. And I'm happy to say we're progressing pretty well on it.
Is that...
We're looking for other federal funding sources other than EDA funds. Those are kind of hard to actually obtain.
What is the nature of the project?
These are the job training centers.
Okay.
Skill developments for technical education, if you will. And that includes not only the forest management skills and medical machinists. We actually interface with our trade unions for that type of thing. Our goal is to get a training center up here.
Yeah.
And getting private industry involved and using that as a farm for their employees.
Correct.
Putting the manufacturing, satellite manufacturing up in Calaveras County. So I recommend we pursue this, and we'll be looking for other federal funding other than EDA.
Yes.
Because there are just X amount of EDA funds out there. And we're familiar, and that's what we're exercising.
Okay.
Using those.
Good.
But if we have something else, that would really help us.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I'm going to be spending some time looking at Department of Labor as well. And I think they do have some training funds. I need to isolate that a little bit more, but I'd like to find out more about the program that you have so that, we're in sync.
Well, why don't we get together here at a break and we'll exchange contact information with our principals on that. We're actually working with the principals of both school districts.
Fantastic.
Superintendents, I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mia, you remember that our conversation was rather lengthy regarding Sierra Pacific Industries
Yes.
and their difficulty in retaining staff. That also holds true for the healthcare industry in this county. And as we age, our people age, so to speak, then the medical needs are continuing to grow without having a sufficient support staff. So we're importing doctors, we're importing ER nurses. Literally, our ambulance providers can't find ER nurses to transport, for instance. So this creates a problem in that we have to use helicopters to get people out of here because we don't have the proper training. So this all kind of works together in looking at what kind of a technical college or technical career path place could be put into Calaveras. And this is not where we want to send somebody to college. This is not the goal.
Right.
But we have a successful fire science program here in ROP. So if we could build on that along with the water wastewater training that's been done here with a guarantee for a job. In other words, if you just get through the course, we'll guarantee you a job.
Right.
Is a tremendous incentive. This is something that even the sheriff's department has done. Is that go through the academy. We'll pay to send you through the academy, and we'll guarantee you a job. Just get through the academy.
Right.
So it could come in many different phases.
Yes.
But we want to know where the federal government can assist us as low-income communities, disadvantaged communities, and to try to lift us up a little bit.
Thank you. Okay. The Cosgrove Creek, so we talked about that a little bit earlier today. Obviously, the local issues, repetitive flood damage, trying to get out of that and get into a more preventative mode, which is what we try to do with our disasters as best we can. As we shaped that feasibility study, and it was interesting, it was an outgrowth of Supervisor Mills, you'll remember it, really kind of the county as well as CCWD looking at, okay, if we're going to make this kind of investment, let's look to create multiple benefits. Let's take flood control at its heart and then see what else we can build onto it, which is I deal with the Corps of Engineers across the country, and this concept of multiple purpose project, that's what communities want. If you can, provide additional benefits, whether they be water supply, recreation, ecosystem restoration, that's the kind of asset that a community really needs. So we thought about that when we had the Corps putting together a feasibility study, and yes, it is flood protection for Cosgrove, but then the idea is, well, can't we reuse those flood flows? Can we, create a weir across it and then move those flood flows and create, kind of seasonal lakes or, retain that to help with the flows. And so, those kinds of concepts were incorporated in the work that we've done to date, as well as some ecosystem restoration, as well as recreation for the communities. The idea is if you've got a retention basin, it's not going to be full all year, couldn't that also serve as, local ball fields for the community? Couldn't we use those maintenance roads as trails for hiking and biking? Let's get creative. If we're going to start making something, let's think about what the community wants and needs. So that was the thinking behind this. The Corps, we came to a point where, cost sharing was required, and I think it was, as a result of a couple of things, bad economy at the time, county not having the funds to do this, CCWD not having the flood control mission, kind of a number of things. But I think it might be well worth our while to relook at it, to look at the range of benefits, to see how they fit with today's needs and the needs of the community, maybe reshape some of it, depending on what we want. But, there has been some good work put in on this, and the good news about how we pursued this one is that it's under the Section 205 program for the Corps, so that's small flood control. It can go up to $10 million on the federal side. You don't have to get it separately authorized by Congress, so it's more of a streamlined, I can't use that word streamlined with the Corps, it just kind of blows my mind, but more streamlined than other approaches because you don't have to go to Congress to get it separately authorized. The Corps has pots of funding for what they refer to as continuing authorities. So funds programs like this, projects like this that aren't, $300 million, that are $10 million on the federal side or less. We can tap into that and just move through the agency and, administratively rather than going to Congress on that. So that's also very helpful on this. So the thought would be to go back, if there was a level of interest, to go back to the Corps to relook at that study under today's lens of our community needs and see if we need to tweak it. But the Corps, as opposed to BLM, it's a $7 billion program. They've got the money. So that's not an issue. We need to work through the Corps' work plan process, which is how you allocate the funds, but they get to earmark rather than Congress these days, and we've had pretty good luck with that. So I just think we've got an asset already that we've spent some time and energy on. It might be worth it to relook at that in today's world for today's needs.
Mia, I might add to that
Yep.
this particular area does fall within the Eastern San Joaquin Groundwater Basin Authority, and the state would be looking at this as a headwaters location for some of the solutions to the groundwater or the subsidence of wells within the valley. And this area also is identified as an ancient well area. So any pumping from that zone around Valley Springs, it creates a problem all unto itself. So surface water in that zone helps to alleviate or help us to resolve the issues that the state is asking us to have in place by 2020.
Right.
So how we can leverage the federal piece to helping to get that resolution done. I wish Brian Moss was sitting here listening to this, but I think it would be a tremendous advantage to everyone involved. You talked about the groundwater retention basins. I fully agree with that as a part of the solution. But what we do with that water and how we help to offset the problem that the state is seeing, if the federal government could assist us, would be a tremendous advantage.
Excellent. Yeah, that's new on the dial since, the issue's been there, but now the requirement is new since this started. So thank you for that.
This project was at one time when I left was about 80, I would say at the time 80% complete. And the major reason for this project was to identify any projects that would relieve the flooding down in the Valley Springs area of this creek. And once we got the projects identified, was to come forward with a shovel-ready project to ask the feds for money for this project. And that was the whole focus of this thing, was to, the other things that you're talking about are offshoots that was talked about at the time, as far as recreational opportunities and what you're talking about, getting the flow into the aquifer. All of those things were talked about. I attended so many of these meetings. We had them monthly, either at the Corps' office in Sacramento or here. But the main goal was to identify the top 2 projects that would relieve the flooding, and then put together a package that would be shovel-ready and apply for the funding, because that's the only way you're going to get the funding for the project is you show them you have projects that will work. You've gone through the studies. You've done everything you're supposed to do. Here's the package we've identified. We're ready to go. It's engineered. It's all ready to go. We just need the funding to do it. And so it was about 80% complete. And so it would be a viable thing to just pick up and go forward. You wouldn't be starting from scratch again.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, if we're done with that one. Then on to the aging infrastructure, now that we're talking about infrastructure, to really look at failing water and wastewater facilities and work to try to bring some federal funds in to start stemming these water rate increases that I think I heard from each and every one of you in our discussions. I would say the good news is there are a couple of programs, both the USDA one, I've been involved in that before. Typically, it's a loan and grant situation, long-term, low-interest loans. On the grant part of it, a couple $1 million, depending on, what can be justified, and on the income of the area, and, the demographics and all that kind of stuff USDA looks at. But it's a good program. It's been around for a while. I think that's a good opportunity for us. The EPA WIFIA program, that's a newer program. That's, again, long-term, kind of low-interest loans. That one has just been in the works for the last couple of years. I think on the federal side for smaller projects, it's about a $5 million loan is what it works out to be. And I don't, we'd have to look to see if that fits. But in my experience, at least some of the states that I've been working on, we could get, a lower interest rate out of USDA than we could under the WIFIA program. So it's going to turn on each state and that kind of thing. But it's there are some opportunities there. Another one is the Corps Section 219 environmental infrastructure. Typically the Corps doesn't do single-purpose wastewater treatment, water supply kind of things, but Congress said, I think you should get into that, So there is a program, Section 219, pretty well established. In this case, unlike the Section 205, we would have to get it separately authorized by Congress, but you can get a whole bunch higher level of funding than $10 million on the federal side, as we see under 205. I mean, $20 million, there's other things, but that we would have to get authorized through Congress. They just passed a Water Resources Development Act, so it would be in the next year or two before they would probably move on to the next set of authorizations for a program like this. But in this case, the Corps does have the funds for these kinds of things. So you have to compete, of course, like we do, but it's not a BLM situation where they just don't have the funds. There's plenty of funds. I've been engaged in very successful 219s across the country, so you just have to have a little bit of patience for the process, having Congress authorize it, and then working through the Corps program, but they do have the funds that are there. We just have to compete for them. So that is another source of funding for us if we wanted to look at it that way. We'll have to spend some time on identifying, okay, what projects are we talking about? What part of the county, where's the highest need in terms of, taking on a project like this. But I wanted to take today to show you that there are some opportunities there for federal funding.
Mia? On all these USDA grant programs that you showed as possible funding, the match for those is 25%?
It varies. Under
USDA?
The water and wastewater disposal program.
I can explain that.
I think that one is 75-25.
That was CCWD had the Reach 3A
Yeah.
project. It was USDA. That was roughly a 1-to-1. In other words, we'll give you $1 million as a grant that's provided you take a loan for $1 million in exchange. It was $1.3 million, but generally that's how those grant loans work. About 50-50.
About 50-50?
The core program is 65-35, 65 federal government. So that's, depending on how you want to do this, there's, a larger federal cost share under that program. So those are kind of the tranches of funding that I see. What I was hoping to accomplish today, and thank you for all of your patience and your input, has been tremendous, is to, see if these 6 consensus areas that I identified through my discussions with you all are ones that you're interested in having us pursue federal funds for. I think we've pretty well identified the outcomes. All of them have to do with federal funds. Not a big surprise there. But if you agree with those areas, then what I'd like to do is to take this discussion and the notes that I have in the background from our discussions and go ahead and shape a draft federal legislative platform for the county, for your consideration, to review, to basically give me the marching orders in a formal way for the areas that you believe are high priority in their consensus across the county. So that's what I'm hoping we can go forward with today and give me my direction to proceed in that way.
I do have one more.
Yes, please.
And it has to do with Highway 4 realignment called the Wagon Trail Project. This is something that's been going on for literally decades, where we're coming into a time window of opportunity with DOT to provide additional funding for that project to keep it on track to break ground in 2021. The issues is that we have the Tiger program currently that we're constantly getting reauthorized for because we are serving a federal forest up the highway from it. But it is the single most dangerous piece of highway in Calaveras County as a state highway. So any effort that we could make, and I'll get together with you on this later, that we could reach out. I'm having the Congressman's office do the same thing, and I'll give you the contacts for that. But there are those kind of projects that come up where it's time sensitive, and it has to do with infrastructure, it has to do with forest or whatever, that we need to be able to understand what they are, take advantage of it, get the support together that you need to be able to take forward. So those are the kind of things. So this is just one of those. It's a very time-sensitive project for us. Mm-hmm. It's shovel-ready, basically. So.
Mia.
Yes.
Item number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Removal of hazardous trees on BLM. We identified some funding sources. And what you're currently doing, engage in discussions with the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science.
Yes.
And the DOI and BLM. Is there any way during your discussions that you can ask them, instead of going to these funds of $10 million that they don't have through the PLM, to ask them as a federal agency to put some pressure on PG&E to come up with funds to remove these trees, since this fire was caused by PG&E, at least to get the hazardous trees that are over roadways removed, and have them discussions with them on it. There might be some possible way that they show them that these trees are pretty soon going to fall, and it could kill or maim or injure people because they're directly over roadways that people pass daily. Just a thought, bring it up to them or plant a seed in their head or something to have somewhat of a discussion with PG&E. I know lawsuits and so forth or whatever, but, it's just a possible thought to come up with some funds to at least get the dangerous trees out of there, off their lands.
Yeah. Have there been any discussions with PG&E and local BLM folks at all? Do you know?
I have no idea, Jack, or
Council, are we approaching that gray area?
I have no idea if, to what extent there's any communication between PG&E and local BLM. At this point, this board or the county has not had those communications, specifically BLM. And I don't encourage you to reach out to PG&E at this point.
yeah, we wouldn't reach out, but we're talking about a federal agency on their own. Just a thought.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, yeah. we do appreciate all creative approaches because, we're now, it's war, right? And so I think that you use any device that you have that's, legally fine. But, we're at a point now where sometimes you have to bring up, all different kinds of opportunities to resolve the issue. It's not for us to determine precisely how the federal agency wants to address the issue. They have their own devices, right? So we're at a point now where, we're in discussions about how to fix the problem. So that can be raised in discussions.
Yeah, I don't have to tell you anything that you don't already know, and you and I have discussed this several times. But these trees are going to come down this winter, and they're going to injure or kill possibly some of our citizens. We don't want to be arrested for protecting our people through a trespass, and they're putting us in a heck of a bind.
Right.
We don't know what to do. We have to have a solution, and none of us want to go away in handcuffs by doing the right thing.
Understood. We'll use every device
I know,
we have. That's all I can.
You're doing a great job at it.
I appreciate all. I mean,
You're
it's
doing what you've ever asked. Thank you.
yeah, it's a lot of urgency. I understand it. There's a lot at stake. This is unacceptable to me to leave this situation as is. They're the landowner. It's their job. Look, it's 8 seconds into overtime. This is not okay.
Yeah.
So
if they just walked away and said, deal with it, we could probably drop those and at least take care of the initial public threat. But I don't see a federal agency ever doing that.
Right.
So.
Right.
All right, well, why don't we open it up to public comment at this time? Hear what the public has to say.
Thank you. Good presentation, and some good points were brought up. But we may be looking at the trees and not seeing the forest. We seem to be asking the federal government to spend more money. There's strong evidence of that. Yet the federal government is bankrupt. It's in debt, 23 or 22 trillion dollars. All of our income tax goes to pay for the debt on that federal government, to pay the debt on that national debt at the low interest rates that we are now. Can you imagine what will happen if the interest rates bump up a little bit? It's going to be pretty serious. So by looking at the forest, we have to think a little differently. And one way is to engage our private sector a little bit more. We have a great timber industry. It's been beat up and beat down by mismanagement of the federal government. Some of that is changing now for the better. We have a good congressman who is alert to increasing the scope of the private sector. By doing this and allowing the private sector to take a stronger role in forests, we can improve water retention. Of course, we increase our lumber supply, which also lowers the cost of housing. There's another problem we have. And we increase the responsibility and future planning. So we need to get the timber industry involved in this process and stop looking to find ways for the federal government to spend more money. It'd be good to make sure the money they do spend is spent more reasonably. On New Melones, New Melones Dam is to stop floods and provide water for agriculture and recreation and other purposes. We need to encourage the federal government to not deviate from that original plan, which was a good one. There's no way that the federal government should participate in draining that New Melones Reservoir in drought conditions so that we really suffer, unless the purpose is to do exactly that. So by by focusing more on the private sector, getting them involved, we may find solutions, and we may not need any more federal money. Thank you.
Other public comments? Seeing none, close public comments, bring it back to the board. Supervisor Mills?
It's interesting to the point of the public comment in that I was with the congressman on the forest tour in Stanislaus County where the federal people did explain that they could manage forest health as a zero cost by removing the trees that they are taking out 6 inches or 8 inches and better, and that it was a zero-sum game if they did it a certain way. And it would not impact negatively the watershed. In fact, it improved the watershed. So the congressman's question then to Vicki Christensen was, why don't we do more of that? So this is not always about money. It's about how we manage money.
So going forward, I think Mia is looking for some direction here, and Tim is looking for some direction here on our consensus and areas of consensus on these 6 items. And Dennis brought up another one. She wants to put together a draft federal legislative platform and bring it back to the board. So are we in agreement on these 6 items that were brought forward and put together a platform and then bring it back? And are we in agreement on the other one that Dennis brought to us?
I'm certainly, I'm certainly good on the 6. The wagon wheel, I thought that's a COG project, right?
Wagon Trail, yeah, that's COG.
So
COG is the lead agency.
COG is the lead agency, so I would suggest maybe COG have that discussion on how they want to go about that. I mean, I know obviously we're part of COG, but so is Angels, and perhaps they want to contribute to the cause.
Well, I'm certainly hear what you're saying, but the project itself is within the county, and it just on the boundaries of going into the city. And it is a county, it is a CARD project, but the money we're looking for to finish the project has to come from federal dollars. Since it is, so that's what we're looking for, and I think that's what Dennis is suggesting, at least get some help here and look for ways to get some funding to finish that project. Right now, I think we're very little. I don't think we've had to break it into different segments, and we don't even have funding right now. We're very close to being ready to start construction of it, but we need this much, and we only have this much right now to go forward just on the first stage of it. So we're looking for all the federal help we can to at least get the project completed. So, I don't know how the rest of Supervisor Oliveira, are you interested in going forward, at least bringing something back to us for further discussion once they put together their platform?
Yeah, yes, I would entertain that. Once again, that is a COG project, and I'm familiar with how long it's taken. Well, see, I was just going to mention that because that benefits my district too. I mean, the upper Highway 4 corridors reliant on getting there. Although FHA funds are being explored by COG and Caltrans, yeah, it doesn't hurt to ask. That's the way I look at it.
Okay. Supervisor Clapp?
Yeah, I'm for anything, take care of the flooding in Valley Springs and fix our sewer and water lines. I mean, that's a biggie in my district.
How about for the Wagon Trail project?
Yeah.
You're on board for that. So we're on board, I think, for going forward with those 7 projects, and you bringing back a platform for us to go through and have a discussion.
Great. That sounds perfect. I'll need some background on that one. to come up to speed, but I know I'll get that from you.
Can I get one point of clarification on bringing back? So I think what me and I kind of envisioned, and again, trying to limit how many times she has to necessarily fly out or not, would be following this discussion, bringing back what is that adopted platform, and then starting to do the legwork of what we want to have together for information and talking points on a trip in probably February timeframe. But I wouldn't necessarily anticipate Ms. O'Connell having to come back in October when this comes back for final adoption, unless the board is specifically requesting that she come.
Well, it's been my experience, and Mia, this is a large number of items to go back on a trip to try and pound and go visit and get funding for. So I think once you put the platform together, we come back for discussion, and we can cut the priorities down a little bit more, and specific items we can target if we go for a trip back there and visit the specific departments that we need to go.
Correct.
To your leadership. But at least we'll start with these 7, and then once the platforms are back and how
We
we're
can
going to engage
prioritize for
in
the visits.
time, because I think March is coming up. We're going to have to go
Correct.
sometime in February in order to hear our voices heard for the funding to become available during that time. So,
Right.
yeah, so.
Right.
So Mia, has it been helpful for CCWD to go back to Washington to lobby in their own behalf?
Yes, yes, it has. Especially because they're smaller. And, you need to spend the time with the agencies, with the Hill, to tell your story so that, you're distinctive from others. And then once you leave, then I'm there to stay on top of that and to do the talking points and the letters and, the legwork that has to be done to make our requests real. So I would say, yes, it has been successful and very worthwhile.
And if you need us to come back,
We were thinking if that's the consensus of the group, to have, maybe joint visits between CCWD and the county, on a range of things, trying to support the program, the overall program, joint program for the county.
That's what we did on a couple items before, and then we split up, and CCWD went on their own way, and I
Right.
and Russ Thomas went on our way to certain areas that were planned out for us to go.
Correct.
And make our spiel. So, but there's a couple items on here if we go forward that, CCWD and us would be right there, especially the watershed areas that we're talking about. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Good. Thank you so much.
thank you for coming
My
to
pleasure.
California.
Thank you for your support. I look forward to it.
All right. We are at about 5 minutes to 12. And we have OES, which we have 30 minutes estimate time on. Consensus of the board, do you want to go to lunch to 1:30 and then
Let's
come
cut
back?
it to 1:30.
Everybody in favor of that? All right. We will go to lunch. We'll be in consensus.
So, Mr. Chair, just to remind everyone that we have a 1:30 timed item, so if we can't hear that item any sooner than 1:30, but we can hear it after, just as a note. So if we still have items 12, 13, and 14, that those would be heard most likely prior to the time certain item.
We'll just move the 1:30 out.
Okay, thank you.